friends, in the series which we are doing on history of India from 1700 to 1950, today we will talk about communal politics and the partition of India. In the earlier three lectures on this particular theme, we talked about the various kinds of developments which had unfolded in the framework of the partition of India, where we find that how the colonial rule, especially the divide and rule policy which was followed by the British, and how over a period of time they enumerated a number of differences which were there in the Indian society. They in a way largely pointed out, they engaged in the sense that how both Hindus and Muslims, they were different kinds of identities which were not suitable in that sense in the context of the unity, and they in a way encouraged such kind of divisive tendencies among the Muslims as well as the Hindus in India. And this was reflected when we find that the Muslim League, which began its journey in 1906, was supported by the British at different points of time, and largely especially in the 1940s its support to the Muslim League became more and more evident. And when we tend to understand the League's position, we find that Muslim League, especially till 1940s, when it demanded the Pakistan through the Lahore resolution, or when the idea of Pakistan was being talked about in the 1930s. So it was not dominant electorally, where it could not secure much seats in 1937, but it was a complete different scenario in 1946, because majority of the Muslim seats, they were being won by the Muslim League at this point in time, which gave them a lot of confidence. And we also see that the kind of slogans which were being used by the Muslim League, they related to Islam, and they argued that when if someone will vote for Muslim League, then the vote would go to Islam. So such kind of a propaganda by the Muslim League was definitely played an important role, and they also created some kind of fear psychosis that if they would vote for the Congress, then it would mean that they are voting for the Hindu rule. So such kind of tactics definitely helped the Muslim League in the long run, and we find that how it was able to secure more and more seats during this particular period because of the populist slogans. And at the same time, we also see that this kind of rise in the electoral strength of the League provided the popularity to the notion of Pakistan, that also compelled Congress to take the demand of League seriously. And we find that this kind of demand was serious in nature, while the supporters of the two nation theory regarded the verdict of 1946 as a vindication of their stand. So we see that how initially the Congress, they were reluctant to accept Pakistan as a demand of the Muslim nationalism, but they were also aware of the popularity of the idea, in that sense that how the Muslim League was harping on this kind of an idea. And we find that many of the nationalist leaders, especially Gandhi, he did not want the division of the country, and he did not participate in all the discussions of the Congress about these developments during 1946. And even when the partition took place, he was in Noakhali in East Bengal trying to restore harmony. And but at the same time, he was also kept informed by the Congress leaders as well. And there is some kind of a debate also with regard to whether any kind of a mass movement at that point of time would have helped the issue, and the partition of the country would not have had taken place. But we find that Gandhi was not in favor of the mass movement. He was against this kind of a decision of the partition of the country, because he felt, but at the same time he felt that the conditions were not conducive for such a kind of a mass movement, because he was not sure whether he could secure support of the people in such an endeavor. And when you talk about the various kinds of scholars, they have also argued that a mass movement against the British was not possible during the last 2 years of the colonial rule. And because when you talk about that kind of a period, and we find that Gandhi's struggle against the blazing fires of communalism in Bengal, Bihar and Delhi was of immense significance. and that was his finest hour as well. But even Sumit Sarkar, he believed that at this point of time any kind of mass movement was not suitable, because the situation in which mass movements they were being launched earlier was entirely different from the present position. And we find that when you talk about these kinds of constitutional developments which were happening in India in that framework, how the different kinds of missions or plans they were being sent to India, as we were talking about the cabinet mission plan in our earlier lecture, and that was not accepted by the Congress because it gave way very limited powers to a common central government for the whole subcontinent. So in that sense we find that cabinet mission plan, it created 3 groups of provinces, 2 groups with Muslim majority provinces in northwest and northeast of India, and it was grouping that was a source of difficulty for the Congress. Initially Congress was willing to accept cabinet mission proposals, but when we find that when it was clarified that the scheme for the group of provinces could not be modified, Sardar Patel decided to oppose it. And to preserve the unity of the country, Gandhi proposed that Muhammad Ali Jinnah be made the Prime Minister of India. So this was a proposal he made twice, once in 1946 and second time in April 1947. So Gandhi wanted to preserve the unity of the country, and twice he made suggestion that Muhammad Ali Jinnah should be made the Prime Minister of India, so as to maintain the unity of the country. And we see that that kind of a scenario where the communal passions they were running higher, how Jinnah had taken some kind of inspiration from Iqbal, and how Iqbal, who turned out to be some kind of a mentor to him during this 1930s period, and how Jinnah was able to implement the ideas of Iqbal in the framework of the division of the country. And we find that Indian communists, they have argued that there are many nations in India and the demand for Pakistan was the nationality demand is also totally inconsistent, in the sense because we find that India is a place where people from different faith, people from different sects, they have lived peacefully. And this kind of a suggestion that there are many nations in India is a totally inconsistent in nature. And but when you tend to understand that how the last decade of the colonial rule brought about this kind of a situation where the division of country was being sought, and we find that the inchoate demand for Pakistan stirred the poets and propagandists who influenced popular mood and fueled communal tensions and anxieties. And when you talk about various historians and how this kind of ideas which they have given, we find that Mushirul Hasan does not subscribe to binary opposition between Indian nationalism and Muslim communalism and separatism, and believes that propaganda of League had a deep impact on several sections of society. So we find that this helped to create not only support for a separate state in Muslim majority regions like Punjab and Bengal, but also fueled anxieties among minorities in these regions as well. And when you talk about the various historiographical schools, we find that the Marxist formulations about the economic basis of communalism or communalization of class struggle may seem overstated or too general, but communitarian identities have always been underpinned and qualified by economic and class differences as well. So we find that these kinds of differences, they definitely existed, but at the same time the way the Marxist formulations of their basis on this issue, they are overstated as well. And when you talk about the other scholars, those who have worked in this field, we find that Muslim League was able to destroy support for the Unionist party by winning support of the landowners of Western Punjab, and how it forged an alliance with the Peers and Sajda Nasheens, a network that had been used by British and Unionist party earlier. So David Gilmartin has talked about this kind of an aspect, and we find that the other scholars, those who have worked on partition, and they have different ideas to offer. J.H. Chatterjee, for example, has argued that the Bhadralok of Bengal had turned to be more Hindu nationalist position after Communal Award of 1932 and weakened the social dominance of the upper caste in Bengal, and how also they were trying to rope in the depressed classes after 1932. So, we find that such kind of scholars basically they in a way ditto the Anil Seal's model of the elite struggle for power, with nationalism being only a layer. So, Chatterjee's perspective, J.H. Chatterjee, what she has argued is also in the framework of the Bhadralok politics. It in a way replicates what Anil Seal's idea is in the framework of the elite struggle for power. And we find that when Seal's later model of the locality with the faction as the operative unit, if Chatterjee's use of the term Hindu satraps for the leaders of Bengal is reminiscent of Judith Brown's subcontractors, there is a strong sense of Anil Seal's, the Sheraduals and factions in Chatterjee's dismissive characterization of Bengal provincial politics as factional dogfights. So, we find that how the Cambridge school with their own ideas and those kinds of ideas, they have been used by some of the Indian scholars like J.H. Chatterjee, those who in a way are not focusing on what actually is happening at that point of time. Rather, some kind of a theory has been developed borrowing from the Cambridge school, and on that count she has also been criticized. And when you tend to understand the way, the kind of position which she has taken, when you see the title of the book, the spoils of partition. So, Chatterjee would have had that partition came about from two ends: Congress initiative at the center, responded to by the Bengal Hindus at the provincial end. So, such kind of interpretations they were there in the framework of the Cambridge school, and how the Cambridge school, they did not even in a way see any kind of a movement which can be called as a national movement. They dismiss that there was any kind of a national movement in India. They just merely see it as some kind of a mimic warfare, and they reject this idea of a national movement or the idea of nationalism which was there in India. And when you see the political situation at that point of time, that how the Direct Action Day, which was called by the League, it led to bloodbath in Calcutta in 1946 and killings in Eastern Bengal, and it strengthened the fears of Muslim majority rule in a united Bengal. So, this kind of a communal frenzy, which was provoked by the Muslim communal groups, with League's Bengal ministry headed by Sohrawardi looking on passively, and how around 5,000 people, they were killed in what came to be known as Great Calcutta Killings. So, we find that such kind of an attitude of the League when it was directly involving in the violence, and that violence was also supported by the state, because the Sohrawardi's government in Bengal at that point of time remained a passive spectator. It did not stop the Muslim League in indulging the kind of violence it indulged during that point of time. And we see that at this point of time how the policy of the British in terms of conciliating League could also be seen, and how Jinnah was able to unleash some kind of a civil war, send the British authorities back to their old policy of placating the Muslims. So, initially, especially in the 40s, when these kinds of developments initially from Lahore resolution they were happening, how League was in a way getting the support of the colonial government, and then we find that there is some kind of a break where we find that League was not supported by the colonial government. But then again, when this kind of a situation of the Direct Action Day came, then we find that how again League was being supported by the colonial rulers, and they also realized that though League was their creation, it was now it has assumed shape of a communal monster which could not be tamed as well, because we find that how British, they supported the League in 1906 when it was being established, and thereafter as well. and but the way the League had developed over a period of time, and the British, they also realized that it had become some kind of a communal monster which they would not be able to control as well. And we see that how Wavell had kept up his effort to bring League into the government, and now the Secretary of State Patrick Lawrence supported him on ground that civil war would become inevitable if League stayed out. And the interim government which was established was another arena of the struggle, where the League's entry into the interim government did not end the conflict, and it only opened up another arena of struggle. So League was allowed to join the interim government without forsaking the idea of Pakistan or the plan of direct action. And the League also did not accept the short term or the long term aspects of the cabinet mission plan. League leaders including Jinnah publicly said that interim government was merely continuation of civil war by other means as well. So we see that how the interim government which was being established was seen as a foothold that would help League to advance towards its goal of Pakistan. And the conflict between the League and the Congress members in the interim government erupted very soon as well, because we find that the choice of the second rung leaders, League leaders as the League nominees in that, except Liaquat Ali Khan, it indicated that League had no intention to share with Congress responsibility for running the government as well. And on the other hand, we find that the intention was to demonstrate that cooperation between the two was impossible. So we find that despite League in entering the interim government, it did not want that the interim government should function smoothly, and its main objective was to in a way derail the government. And whenever any kind of a decision was taken, then the main point of the League members was to disagree with that decision or action taken by the Congress colleagues, and they refused to attend the parties at which Congress members would decide the formal meeting of the Executive Council so as to sideline Wavell. And when the non-cooperation of the League both outside as well as the inside government, it became clear the Congress members demanded that the League either give up direct action or leave the government. So we find that when this kind of a situation was unfolding and League was not cooperating at that point of time, and it did not want that smooth functioning of the government takes place, and League had this kind of a point in mind that once they will create this kind of a situation when they will show that the differences between the Congress and the League are irreconcilable, they could not be reconciled. And we find that the breaking point came when the League demanded that the Constituent Assembly be dissolved because it was unrepresentative. And on 5th February 1947, we find that the Congress members of the interim government, they sent a letter to Wavell with demand that the League members should be asked to resign, and the crisis was imminent at that point of time. And when you tend to see the political developments which were happening at this point of time, when Italy announced that the British would withdraw from India by 30th June 1948, and Lord Mountbatten would replace Wavell as the Viceroy. And this was no answer to the constitutional crisis that was at hand, but it showed that British decision about leaving India remained unchanged. So we find that despite any kind of claims which were being made later years, Italy, who said that we would have preferred a unified India and that we couldn't get it through though we tried hard. So, but when we tend to see the truth, we find that the British chose to play safe and take both sides along without exercising any check or restraint, even when situation demanded this type of assertion of authority. So we find that British, they did not act decisively at that point of time. The kind of dilly-dallying which was exhibited by them, the kind of strong decisions which they should have taken at that point of time, none of them they were there. And their preponing of the independence of India and the delaying of the Boundary Commission Award, all of them, and we find that how the administrative officials, they were not at their positions when India Pakistan got divided. So that was the kind of a situation which led to the kind of a migration, the kind of atrocity, the kind of violence which was perpetrated on the common citizens of the country. And as we were talking about whether any kind of a mass movement would have helped in the framework of dissolving the communal tensions, and the kind of anti-imperialist struggle could have helped to bring about the national unity. But we find that the situation which was there in the earlier mass movements was totally different from the present times, and the social discontent of the post-war period in combination with the communal polarization did not bode well for an anti-imperialist struggle to combat the idea of Pakistan. And we had seen that how the Muslim mass contact program had not worked well in 1930s, before the Muslim League had demonstrated its electoral strength, and any movement launched in a period of social tensions in post-war years was bound to exceed the limits of non-violence prescribed by Gandhi. Therefore, the option of a mass movement was not accepted by Gandhi at this point of time. He himself did not agree to this idea that mass movement would be successful at this point of time. And we find that the members of the Muslim middle class and capitalists, they had also realized that a separate state was bound to give them a distinct advantage, and they were unlikely to forego it. So we find that the people, those who would get the benefits of a separate state, the elite class, they were not ready to give in to this idea, because they felt that the separate state would provide them a number of privileges at this point of time. And the Indian leaders, especially Patel, he said that you won't govern yourself and you won't let us govern, when he gave this statement to the Viceroy, because the kind of administration, the kind of handling of the situation by the British at that point of time, in a way made him to retort in this manner, because the British, they were not governing themselves, and they were neither allowing the other political party Congress to govern. And we find that the way British abdicated their responsibility in terms of advancing the date and the speed with which the country was partitions, they were disastrous from the point of view of the Indians, and they suited the British because they forsaking their responsibility for worsening the communal situation. And the way Mountbatten delayed the announcement of the Boundary Commission award was another important highlight in that sense, because if he would have announced the Boundary Commission at an appropriate time, then the situation might have been a bit different. But at the same time, we also have to see that administrative machinery at that point of time, the people, those who were there in the administration, they were not stationed at at their postings. Many of the people, they were busy in taking transfer orders. The people, those who the officials, those who moved from India to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India, they were also not sure about their postings. And if the administrative apparatus would have been placed, if army and police and other organs of the state, those who are there in terms of maintaining the law and order situation, then the scenario could have been totally different. But British, they were not ready to accept all this kind of a responsibility once it became clear to them that they had to leave India, and their crowning glory, where they had taken so much raw material, so much sources of revenue, all of that which they could drain out of India, which now they will not be able to do it in the future. So they in a way did not take up that kind of a responsibility in an appropriate manner. So in that sense, when we tend to understand the communal politics of that particular period, when we tend to understand that what were the reasons for the partition of India, what were the reasons for the communal politics at that point of time, where British encouraged through their divide and rule policy, where we find that the different communities, they should not come together, they are not united, how various kinds of surveys etc. which were being done by the British, and in these surveys we find that more communities, new kind of communities, they were being enumerated by them. So this idea of not seeing India as a united country was the idea of the British, and in this manner we find that they also supported any kind of a communal group, especially the Muslim League, which was supported by them. And when you talk about how the scholars, they have tried to see this particular situation, many of them they have either seen it in the framework of the failure of the British, that how British, they had to, the kind of flight which British took from India was a shameful kind of a flight, where they abdicated their responsibility, because of which so much violence and migration could be seen. And the communal politics of this particular period in 30s and 40s, it definitely played an important role in the partition of the country, despite that so many leaders, those who wanted the unity of the country, especially Gandhi, who wanted that the country remains united, and made a number of attempts as well. And we find that he was also so fearless that during the period when riots, they were happening in different parts of the country, he was there in Noakhali, which was the worst affected area in terms of the violence, and he was trying to douse the fire of the communal passion in those regions. And the history of partition in that sense has been also shown or has been written in, apart from the historiography, we find that it has also been written in so many stories in terms of literature. And at the same time we find that Saadat Hasan Manto, Rajinder Singh Bedi, Amrita Pritam, all of them they have written about partition. And in the framework of cinema also, we find that so many films on partition, beginning from Lahore, Pinjar for that matter, Garm Hawa, they have also been made, which talk about the tragedy of partition. So partition is not only a political tragedy, but it was a human tragedy as well, where we find that so many people, they lost their lives, they were being displaced, they had to migrate. So with this I would like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.